everybody, I hope you guys are doing well today. I wanted to do a video on esotericism, just generally, what is esotericism? And before I go into what is esoteric, Christian esotericism, and how that's looked through the ages, starting with the early church and then going on to things like the Knights Templar, I realize it's important to kind of define my terms here. This is something that I really have talked a lot about. It's, you could say, like my MK Ultra word, esoteric. But there's a lot of, I think, misunderstandings about what it is. And just to give you a preliminary definition, I'm going to say esotericism is spiritual practices, initiatory practices that result in this inward transformation. It's very much an inward focused. Esoteric is very inwardly focused. Now, some people like to think that esoteric means like arcane or something that's niche, something that very few people know about. And the only reason that is taken on this kind of secondary definition is because that which is so inward is buried deep within the human composite that it becomes very difficult to express and to make intelligible to people who are not very in tune with their inward spiritual lives, people who do not have internal monologues. And for that reason, it becomes very niche, it becomes very selective and very occult, in the sense that it's a secret, not in the sense that it's like satanic. Which reminds me of another a quote here by Frithjof Schumann, in which he says here, the term, quote, esotericism has so often been misused in order to cloak ideas that are unspiritual as they are dangerous, and what is known of esoteric doctrines has been so frequently plagiarized and deformed. And so a lot, end quote. And so a lot of people think that esotericism is like Freemasonry or it's some New Age thing. It's a really weird, bizarre adaptations I've heard that come from people who are entirely not interested in inward transformation, but are interested in just these a posteriori like feelings. This like, oh, I want to feel good, or I want to feel like I'm enlightened, or blah 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 blah. You know, it's not you know the types who say these things. I want to feel at peace and nirvana. Blah, blah, blah. They're like the New Age kind of spooks. Anyway, that's not at all what esoteric doctrine is about. Esoteric doctrine, it can only happen through initiation and through an inward transformation. And to begin to understand what is like esotericism and the end of esotericism, it is objectivity. And so let me read here another quote by Frithjof Schumann. This is from his book Esotericism as Principle and Way. It's a really good book. He says, quote, the prerogative of the human state is objectivity, the essential content of which is the absolute. There is no knowledge without objectivity of the intelligence. There is no freedom without objectivity of the will. And there is no nobility without objectivity of the soul, end quote. And so what is objectivity? Objectivity is the ability to discern that which is illusion, that which is contingent, that which is something that is transitory and relative, from that which is eternal, that which is absolute, that which is necessary, and that which will last forever, that which is not transient. And so objectivity is the ability to be able to discern between the two. And it is only through a comprehension of the absolute that we can have objectivity. It's only through a reception of the absolute in our own lives that we can be able to begin to have objectivity. So objectivity is the prerogative of the human state, like he says, and there can be no freedom without objectivity of the will to discern between the absolute, that which is free, and that which is determined, that which is material. We can have no nobility without objectivity of the soul to determine what is just, again, something that's material, something that's relative, these just atoms hitting each other, and that which is has dignity, that which has rationality, like ourselves. And so this is very important to understand. And it's because we have the spark of God in us. It's because part of the mind, our intelligence, is immaterial, that we can discern the absolute. And in the Garden of Eden, in the archetypal state that humanity originated from, it spawned from, we are able to do this perfectly because we are in perfect harmony with God. We are able to have this perfect sense of objectivity. Unfortunately, because of the fall, we've lost this in a spiritual sense, but we still regain it in a very civil sense. We still have what you might call civil righteousness, but not a spiritual righteousness. We can never satisfy God. We will always be sinful. beings. We just give in to our material carnal nature, but we still have a civil righteousness, and this is something that you could call intellectual intuition. And it's a direct form of knowledge. So there's like two forms of knowledge. This is important to remember. There's two forms of knowledge. There's discursive knowledge, and discursive knowledge is a knowledge in which we take in the world around us, and then we apply these a priori categories or concepts to it in order to make it intelligible. And then we apply individual human reason, basically, in this process. This is individual knowledge. This is something that is completely isolated to the individual, whereas direct knowledge is something that is universal to all humans, because we all have the spark of God. It comes from this window in our soul. It comes from like this eye in our consciousness, basically. And there are these things that are presupposed before we can even begin to be intelligent, and to even begin to be rational. And these are things that are transcendent. That is how we know that they are from the soul, as they have to do with perfect beauty, have to do with beauty, morality, goodness. These are things that are not do not come from the outside world. We're not just like Plato, and goodness and beauty come from the outside, but rather this is something that starts in the soul. And indeed, even like perfect idea of the perfect form, perfect concepts, like the perfect sense of the triangle, perfect sphere, things of that sort. It can also be argued things which are perfectly good. We can argue that these are also elements, these concepts, universals, are elements in which they come from the immaterial part of us. I had a guy on my show recently in which he argued for the immateriality of the soul based on the fact that humans have concepts, unlike like a bull, for example, or rather a cow. You're leading a cow to a gate. The cow doesn't see the gate and think, "Oh, look, there's a gate." No, they see a particular gate. There's particulars, and then there's universals. In the material world, everything is a particular. But for the mind, which has in themselves the spark of God, they see universals, they see things that can only exist also in the mind of God. These are the perfect idea of the gate, or the perfect form of shapes, which all things are made of shapes in the 3D world, this spatial temporal world that we live in. And so he sees the perfect form, and the reason why we're able to see this is because we have the spark of God in us. It directs us to that. It reminds us of this. Plato talks about this sense of reminiscence. Now, Plato believed in reincarnation, and so that when we died, our soul returned to this pure state, detached from the material world, and then when it was reincarnated, we are beginning to re-remember everything that our pure soul learned when it was just being able to assimilate all the universals. And so I of course, both Shuan and myself and anyone who is interested in esotericism rejects reincarnation, those who are serious about it at least. And so instead what we would say is that because we have the spark of God, then we're able to, in a sense, remember those things, not because we're reincarnated, but because we come from the spawn of Adam and Eve, because we have an immaterial mind. We're able to see, and this is what we call intellectual intuition. We're able to have universals. We're able to understand goodness, beauty. It's like a sixth sense almost, as well as even the existence of God. This is something that is intellectually intuitive to all humans. It's just properly basic. Every civilization there's never been a civilization where you're like, oh, these people are all atheist. No, you can call them pagans, heathens, but they all believe in some form of deity, something that is transcendent. Which goes to the next principle, which is to say that that there's this direct form of knowledge, and the first form is just intellectual intuition. And then there's another form, which is esotericism. And the end, again, is the same. It's objectivity. And so we have objectivity in a very civil sense, and then we also want objectivity in a spiritual sense. We want a deeper understanding of God through a union with God. We don't just want to have like whatever's left after the fall, in which we are basically still, like, we've degenerated into this, in a spiritual way, in the state where we are slaves to our vices, slaves to our carnal appetites, to our appetitive appetites, our appetitive nature. But rather, we want to be transcendent. We want to transcend this. We want to return to this pure spiritual state when we only have direct knowledge from God. We live and we sustain ourselves on direct knowledge. We thrive on that. And so that is what the Esotericism purports to do, is it's through certain initiation that we receive Gnosis, or wisdom, as it's often called. This is something that the Greeks have understood. This is why philosophy, philosophy, or Sophia, it was the love of wisdom. And the love of wisdom for the Greeks, they made it very clear that the definition of wisdom was the pursuit of eternal things. This is what makes us wise. This is what Gnosis is. This is what, in I believe, in other religions, they have other words to call this, but it's basically the pursuit of eternal things. And it's not just simply at a civil level, but a spiritual, a total level. We're no longer fixated and trapped in this animal body, this material body, but we can transcend it. And so through some acts of initiation, we can transcend it, and we can be united with God. This spiritual and inward changing that can propel us to salvation. That's what salvation is, really. That's what theosis is. That is why I've said that theosis is a very esoteric concept, and I'll probably do more videos on that in the future. And so the other element of it is immanence. So there's transcendence, and then there's immanence. And imminence is not like something's about to happen really quickly. It's like, oh, it's imminent that there's a tsunami coming or something like that. But imminence in the sense that it's intrinsic. It's something that is intrinsic in the nature of reality. And that is another part of Gnosis, is that it reminds us that God, if we can see form, we can see principle in all things in nature, we can see it in ourselves. And this is immanence. This is that God is immanent in the world he created, that he's the one who sustains the world he created. He's the one who has his fingers and everything. He's omnipresent. He's omnipotent. And so that is another category that we're able to comprehend, we're able to understand, we're able to assimilate in our lives through esotericism, is transcendence and immanence. And it's by initiation, which is the sacraments. And I'll get to that another time, and how that looks in the Christian religion. So the way you can understand it is that the religion in this exoteric sense, we talk about religion in the esoteric and exoteric. Exoteric religion, it just tells us how to act in this very legalistic ideas. That is why in Islam they say Sharia law is the exoteric part. It tells Muslims how to live life, and you could say that canon law is the exoteric part of Christianity, and the esoteric part is the Shahada in Islam, or it's there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet, is the essence of Islam that tells their believers how they ought to live their lives, how they ought to spiritually love God and to understand God. And the same is true of Christianity, that the heart of the gospel, the heart of love, the sacraments, the ability to love our neighbors is something that is not expected to become law. We don't expect that there's going to be a law that says to turn the other cheek. That doesn't even make sense. There's no way to write that into law, but rather that this is an inward spiritual practice that Christians are expected to adopt because it is esoteric, because it unites us to God, because it grants us Gnosis. And this is ultimately something that this is objectivity. That's the end of esotericism, because God knows himself. That's really what it is. It comes down to. We cannot discern, as humans that are material, we only see that as material. But it's because of God within us, because of the spark of God within us, that we're able to discern that which is God, that which is absolute, and that which is relative. That is why it won't be until we receive complete and full theosis, when we receive the beatific vision, and we're able to comprehend the divine essence, that we'll be able to fully understand exactly what is relative, exactly what the Trinity is. All these things will be immediately comprehended. That is the fullness of Gnosis right there, and it's only possible if we have God within us. That is why we must be united to God. That is why we must have a transmutation of the soul, is because it is only God knows God, and therefore only God, who acting within us, can show us himself, can help us to be objective. And that is the only way we can love God. We are called, that is the end of humans, is to love God, to serve God, to know God. And how can we love someone we do not know? And how can we know someone who we are not? And so the only way to do that is through reception of God, to be united with God. This is, again, this inward transformation. And of course, the end result is that we can share in the life of God. That is the end of it all. is to share. The end of all of our human life is to share in the life of God, to be with God forever, to be able to comprehend the perfect forms, as Plato says, is to comprehend the divine essence. And that, on a civil sense, is something that we can kind of understand, but on a spiritual sense is nothing we can grasp until we die. All we can do is work towards that end, though, each and every day through certain initiatic practices, which I will go into further videos. So I thank you for listening, guys. Hope you learned something new there. It is certainly a very interesting topic, something I'm very interested in, and I hope you guys will be interested as well.